He should be further along by now. He should call more often. He should try harder. He should be happier. The palace of should had no doors, only mirrors. This story explores the tyranny of should, those invisible commands that govern our lives, making us feel perpetually inadequate. What if you could distinguish between genuine obligations and internalized demands? Let this tale gently lift the weight as you sink into rest. In a city of obligations and expectations, there stood a palace built entirely from shoulds. Every brick was a command, every window a judgment, every door a demand. That could never quite be met. The palace had no official name, but those who found themselves inside it called it the place of never enough. Living in this palace was a man named Daniel Torres, 36 years old, and he was drowning under the weight of everything he should be doing. He should be further along in his career by now. He should call his mother more often. He should exercise every day. He should eat better. He should be saving more money. He should have achieved more by 36. He should be in a relationship. He should be more social. He should be more productive. He should be happy. The shoulds were endless, multiplying, impossible to satisfy. Each one completed spawned 3 more. The palace grew larger every day, its walls pressing in, its ceilings lowering, its demands increasing. Daniel woke each morning, crushed by the weight of everything he should do that day. He went to bed each night haunted by everything he should have done, but didn't. His entire life had become a performance measured against an impossible standard that moved further away with every step toward it. He was exhausted, not just physically, but existentially. The kind of tired that sleep didn't touch because it came from trying to meet demands that could never be satisfied. One breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. Daniel was sitting at his desk at work, staring at his task list when something inside him simply stopped. The list was 23 items long, all of them urgent, all of them important, all of them things he should be doing right now. But he couldn't. He physically could not make himself do any of them. He sat paralyzed, the should voice screaming in his head, his body refusing to comply, stuck in a moment of complete overwhelm. A colleague found him there an hour later, still staring at the list, and gently suggested he go home. At home, Daniel did something he'd never done before. He wrote down every single should that was ruling his life. Every obligation, expectation, demand, standard he was trying to meet. The list filled 6 pages. Work shoulds: be more productive, arrive earlier, stay later, respond to emails faster, network more, seek promotion, develop new skills, be indispensable, never show weakness, always have solutions. Relationship shoulds: call his mother weekly, visit his father monthly, stay in touch with extended family, maintain friendships, date seriously, find a partner, get married. Eventually, be emotionally available, remember birthdays, show up to events. Health shoulds: exercise daily, eat clean, sleep 8 hours, meditate, stretch, take vitamins, go to the doctor annually, floss twice daily, maintain proper posture, stay hydrated. Financial shoulds: save 20% of income, invest wisely, build emergency fund, Pay off student loans faster. Don't waste money. Buy property eventually. Plan for retirement. Be financially responsible. Personal development shoulds. Read more, learn new things, develop hobbies, be more cultured, stay informed, be well-rounded, improve continuously, never waste time, always be growing. Social responsibility shoulds. Vote, stay informed politically, support causes, help others, volunteer, reduce environmental impact, be a good citizen, make a difference. Looking at the list, Daniel understood why he was exhausted. He was trying to meet the expectations of 50 different people while also meeting impossible internal standards. He'd absorbed from culture, family, and his own harsh judgment. No one could do all this. It was literally impossible. And yet he'd been beating himself up for failing to achieve the impossible. Daniel began investigating where each should came from. Who had installed this particular command? When had it become part of his operating system? Some were obvious. Call your mother weekly, directly from his mother, reinforced. With guilt when he failed. Be further along in your career, from his father, who'd achieved more by Daniel's age and never let him forget it. But others were more subtle, absorbed from culture and media and the collective voice of society. Exercise daily wasn't something anyone had explicitly told him. It was just everywhere the constant message that good people exercised, successful people were fit, and failure to do so meant moral weakness. Be happy was particularly insidious. No one had commanded him to be happy, yet the expectation was constant. Happy people were well-adjusted, successful, doing life right. If you weren't happy, you were failing somehow, doing something wrong, in need of fixing. As Daniel traced each should to its source, he realized most of them had nothing to do with what he actually wanted or needed. They were external impositions he'd internalized so completely that they felt like his own desires. But they weren't. They were voices of people who weren't living his life, making demands based on their values, their circumstances, their vision of what a good life looked like. And he'd been trying to satisfy all of them simultaneously, which was why he was drowning. Daniel decided to try something radical. For 1 week, he would abandon all shoulds that didn't serve an immediate practical necessity. He wouldn't do anything because he should, only because he genuinely wanted to, or because there was a real, concrete consequence he was unwilling to accept. Day 1, he didn't exercise. He should have, but he asked himself, do I actually want to work out today? No. Will something bad happen if I don't? No. So he didn't. He read, instead, which he actually enjoyed. Day 2, he didn't call his mother. He should have, but he didn't want to, and nothing terrible would happen if he waited another week. The guilt was enormous, but he sat with it, recognizing it as just a feeling, not a command that had to be obeyed. Day 3, he left work at 5 p.m. He should have stayed later. There was always more to do, but he asked, is anything on fire? Will the company collapse if I leave now? No and no. So he left, walked to a park, sat on a bench, did nothing, violated every productivity should in his arsenal. Day 4. He ate pizza for breakfast. He should have had something healthy, but he wanted pizza, and he was starting to distinguish between health needs, nutrition, energy, and arbitrary shoulds about what breakfast should look like. Day 5. He ignored a social event he'd felt obligated to attend, sent regrets, stayed home, felt like a terrible friend and person, but also felt relief. By the end of the week, Daniel noticed several things. First, most shoulds had no real consequences beyond his own guilt and anxiety. The sky didn't fall. People weren't devastated. Life continued. Second, without the constant pressure of should, he had energy and attention for things he actually wanted to do. He read 3 books that week, played his guitar for the first time in months, took long walks, actually enjoyed his meals. Third, he felt guilty constantly. The should voice never stopped screaming at him for his failures, but he was starting to recognize it as just noise, not truth. After his week of abandonment, Daniel began a more careful sorting. Not all shoulds were arbitrary or oppressive. Some pointed toward genuine values or real obligations. He created 3 categories. Category 1, real obligations, things that if not done would have real, concrete, negative consequences he was unwilling to accept. Pay rent, consequence, lose housing. Show up to work, consequence, lose job and income. Maintain basic hygiene, consequence, health issues, social problems. File taxes, consequence, legal trouble. These were few. Most were basic adult responsibilities that maintained his ability to function in society. Category 2, genuine values, things he actually wanted to do because they aligned with his authentic values, not shoulds from external sources. Stay in touch with the few friends he genuinely cared about because connection mattered to him. Exercise sometimes, not daily, but regularly, because he genuinely felt better. When he did, read not to be cultured or educated, but because he loved it. Play music, same it brought him joy, not obligation. These were more numerous than the real obligations, but still manageable. They were things he'd want to do even if no one was watching or judging. Category 3, arbitrary shoulds, everything else. The demands that served no practical purpose and didn't align with his actual values. Just voices he'd internalized, telling him who he should be. Be further along in career. Said who? By what metric? Exercise every single day. Why? For whose standard? Save exactly 20% of income. Arbitrary number from a book. Be more social. Who decided he should be more social? Never waste time. Who defined what counts as waste? Always be improving. Why? To what end? Be happy. How is this even a should? Happiness isn't achieved through obligation. The third category was enormous, at least 3/4 of what had been governing. His life was in this category, arbitrary standards he'd absorbed without questioning. Demands that served no one, expectations that made his life worse. He could just stop trying to meet them, stop judging himself for failing them, stop giving them authority over how he spent his days. The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Daniel began actively rebelling against Category 3 shoulds, not quietly, internally, but explicitly and purposefully. When the voice said, "You should be doing something productive right now," he'd respond out loud, "Says who? Why? What if I just sit here instead?" And then he'd sit, doing nothing, feeling the anxiety, letting the should voice scream, but not obeying it. When the voice said, "You should be further along in your career by now," he'd ask, "Compared to whom? By what timeline? Who decided this standard?" The voice rarely had good answers. It just insisted, should be, must be, have to be. But Daniel was learning. The voice had no actual authority. It was just noise, just conditioning, just internalized voices of people who weren't living his life and had no right to dictate it. He started saying no to things he'd always said yes to out of obligation. Social events he didn't want to attend. Projects at work that weren't his responsibility. Family demands that required sacrifice with no reciprocation. Each no felt like tearing something, like violating a fundamental law, but nothing terrible happened. People were sometimes disappointed, sometimes annoyed, but they adjusted, found other solutions, moved on. And Daniel discovered most people's expectations of him were negotiable. They'd push as far as he let them, but when he held boundaries, they respected them. Not always gracefully, but they respected them. The shoulds started to lose their power. The palace of obligations began to crumble, slowly, brick by brick, as Daniel stopped feeding it with his compliance. As the oppressive shoulds fell away, Daniel began building something new, a life based on wants and values rather than obligations and expectations. Instead of asking, "What should I do?" he asked, "What do I actually want to do?" Instead of, "How should I be?" he asked, "How do I actually want to be?" Instead of, "What's expected of me?" he asked, "What matters to me?" The answers were surprising, simpler than the complex web of shoulds, more authentic, more sustainable. He wanted meaningful work, not necessarily prestigious or high-paying work. He wanted a few deep friendships, not an extensive social network. He wanted time for creativity and rest, not constant productivity. He wanted enough money to be secure, not wealth. He wanted to feel alive in his days, not accomplished. These wants were different from his shoulds, less ambitious by conventional standards, less impressive, less likely to earn approval. But they were his, authentic, real, and pursuing them felt completely different from trying to satisfy shoulds. Daniel changed jobs, taking a lower-paying position that gave him more time and less stress. His father was disappointed. The should voice screamed about wasting his potential. But Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. He let some friendships fade, the ones that were maintained out of obligation rather than genuine connection. The should voice called him a bad friend, but the friends who remained were people he actually wanted to spend time with. He stopped going to the gym daily and instead walked, played basketball sometimes, hiked on weekends, movement he enjoyed rather than exercise he forced himself. His should voice said he was lazy, but his body felt better than it had during his gym obsession phase. Slowly, carefully, he built a life that was his. Not impressive by should standards, not what anyone would call extraordinary, just real, chosen, alive. The shoulds didn't disappear completely. They couldn't. Some were legitimate. Some would always try to creep back in. But Daniel developed practices for managing them. The interrogation. Every time a should arose, he'd question it. Who says I should do this? Why should I? What happens if I don't? Is this serving my actual values or just arbitrary standards? Most shoulds couldn't survive this interrogation. They'd dissolve under examination, revealed as hollow commands with no real authority. The translation? For shoulds that persisted, he'd translate them from obligation to choice. Instead of I should call my mother, he'd reframe, I choose to call my mother because maintaining that relationship matters to me, even though it's sometimes difficult. Instead of I should exercise, he'd reframe, I choose to move my body in ways I enjoy because it makes me feel good. The shift from should to choose was subtle but profound. Shoulds were imposed. Choices were owned. Shoulds created resentment. Choices created agency. The boundary. When external shoulds came from others, he'd hold boundaries. You should visit more often. Response. I visit as often as I'm able to, given my other commitments. You should be doing more with your career. Response. I'm content with my current path, not defending, not explaining, not justifying, just stating his choice and letting others' disappointment be their own to manage. Living free of arbitrary shoulds had costs. Daniel's father barely spoke to him anymore, disappointed in his lack of ambition. Some former friends thought he'd become selfish. His career advanced more slowly than it might have if he'd driven harder. But the gift was larger than the cost. Daniel felt like himself for the first time since childhood, felt present in his own life, rather than constantly performing for invisible judges, felt agency rather than obligation, felt alive rather than adequate. He had energy now, not the frantic, caffeine-fueled energy of trying to meet impossible demands, but sustainable energy that came from doing things he actually wanted to do. He had peace, not the peace of having checked every box, but the peace of being okay with who he actually was rather than constantly striving to become who he should be. He had authenticity. His relationships were real because they were based on genuine connection rather than obligation. His work was meaningful because he'd chosen it for real reasons rather than because it was what he should do. The palace of shoulds had collapsed, and in its place Daniel had built something smaller, simpler, but infinitely more livable. A life that was actually his. People noticed the change in Daniel. They couldn't name it exactly, but something was different. He seemed less stressed, more present, more himself. A younger colleague asked him one day, "How do you do it? How do you seem so unbothered by everything?" Daniel smiled. "I stopped trying to do everything I should do and started doing what I actually want or need to do. Everything else I let go. But don't you feel guilty?" "All the time," Daniel admitted. "The should voice never completely shuts up, but I've learned it's just noise. It has no actual authority over my life unless I give it that authority. He shared what he'd learned, the interrogation, the translation, the boundary setting, the practices that helped him distinguish between real obligations and arbitrary shoulds. The thing is, Daniel said, we've been conditioned our entire lives to respond to shoulds as if they're commands we must obey. But they're not. They're just suggestions. Many of them bad suggestions, and we get to choose whether to follow them. His colleague looked skeptical. But what if you choose wrong? What if you let go of something you should have kept? Then you adjust, Daniel said. You're not locked in forever to every choice. If you let go of something and realize it actually mattered, you can pick it back up. But most of what we think we should do, we won't miss it. We'll just feel lighter. You are drowning in shoulds right now, this moment. They're pressing down on you from all directions, these invisible commands that govern your life. You should be doing something more productive than this. You should have achieved more by now. You should be different than you are. You should be further along. You should be better. The shoulds never stop. They multiply, they shift. As soon as you satisfy one, 3 more appear. You cannot win. The game is rigged, but you can stop playing. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, notice the shoulds. Just notice them. You don't have to fight them or fix them or satisfy them. Just notice them arising. I should have done more today. I should be asleep by now. I shouldn't be anxious. I should be better at relaxing. And when you notice them, ask, says who? Why should I? What if I didn't? Most shoulds cannot answer these questions. They're just noise, just conditioning, just inherited commands that have no actual authority. You are not obligated to meet every should. You are not failing if you don't. You are just human, living an actual life rather than a theoretical perfect life that doesn't exist. Let go of one should tonight. Just one, the one that's weighing most heavily. I should do. Let it go. Watch it float away. Notice that nothing terrible happens when you release it. You are enough as you are, not because you've met all the shoulds, but because the shoulds were never valid measures of your worth. Rest in that truth tonight. Let sleep dissolve the obligations. Let darkness carry away the demands. You are free to just be, just this, just you, just here, enough, more than enough.